Hello, today I'm reviewing Skyfall, no connection with James Bond. This is a 1976 science fiction novel from Harry Harrison. Yes, it is my third attempt to truly enjoy something by Harrison. Skyfall, though, is something of a departure in that it is, according to the cover, a novel of almost unbearable suspense, whereas the previous two, Bill the Galactic Hero and Technicolor Time Machine, were both comedies. In Skyfall, the Russians and the Americans have put aside some of their political differences in order to build Prometheus, a spaceship the size of a battleship that will put a solar power generator in space and then beam that power back to receivers on Earth as radio waves. There is some concern among the lay people of Earth that this could all go wrong and it will act as some kind of unintentional death ray. The launch of the ship is delayed due to some technical problems, and that tale is interspersed with some asides detailing the everyday humdrum lives of an English new town. We learn that life is getting harder for these people as scarcity of natural resources is pushing prices up. The orbital power generator is supposed to be part of the solution to that. We're also introduced to a number of people on the ground working on the project, their behind-the-scenes political one-upmanship, and the 6 crew members of the Prometheus. The Russians have sent a female co-pilot in order to show that they're more progressive than the capitalist pigs. Her presence certainly irks the misogynists of the American command. So when the ship doctor falls sick, the Americans replace him with a black woman to one-up them in return. The problem is that the biggest sexist jackass among all the capitalists is the pilot, Patrick, whose liberated sexual talk and handsy sexual advances have already alienated the co-pilot Nadia, and despite professing his feelings for her, he hits on Coretta as soon as she appears on the scene. He's a class act. But Coretta is the sort of person who has sex on mission with the same man whose psychotic break had had him physically trying to murder her just seconds earlier, so who knows, perhaps there is potential happiness for them all. It only takes a few minutes in space for Prometheus to start developing problems, some of which are caused by the crew themselves, who seem to half attempt fixes, break stuff, including their own life support at one point, and then give up. The Prometheus is left in a decaying orbit, and should the technical problems not be resolved, it will crash somewhere on the American West Coast with the force of an atomic explosion. Other problems are caused by the petty behaviour of the various factions on the ground, and in the final act the focus switches from space to the internal squabblings among the Americans in Washington. By far the best part of the novel is when the crew is in space. Patrick's behaviour on the ground makes him hard to warm to, but when reliant on competence and command in space, he's far more tolerable. Nadia is a grey and dour figure, unemotional and sidelined enough that any supposed payoff from their awkward and unlikely relationship is a non-starter. Coretta, by contrast, is better on the ground, fielding questions of affirmative action with a calm hand while putting the questioners in her own team firmly in their place. Her behaviour around her attacker/romantic interest, the Russian payload specialist, is bizarre in the extreme and reads like an unlikely teen fantasy, rather out of place in what is generally tightly paced scenes. Further, it shines a light on whether a crew of 5 astronauts would even require a specialist doctor. It seems unlikely, but Coretta is generally the least repellent, stone-cold or otherwise psychotic member of the crew. The middle passage of the book, where the Prometheus suffers a string of problems with each potential fix revealing a secondary problem and divisions within the crew and those on the ground, is very strong. As with movies like Gravity or Apollo 13, each potential problem needs teamwork, ingenuity and expertise to overcome, and each one reveals further danger to those on the ground. It isn't quite a cliffhanger on every page, but there is a string of chapters that ends with decent hooks, just like those on your screen at the moment. This is something I talked about in my review of 2001, and the comparison there would be quite easy. However, 2001 handles it better, even though Skyfall does mostly hit the right beats. However, Harrison attempts to undo his own attempts to up the ante when the Prometheus begins to start its manoeuvring engines. 14 hours and 44 minutes to go, which is not very much time. Tell them we're in a hurry and have an orbit to catch. The problem here is that without further information, the better part of 15 hours does seem like quite a long time, even when you're told it's not. If you want to have 15 hours sound like a problem, then tell us something like 14 hours and 44 minutes to go, 4 hours to run the engine's checks, another 8 to bring it online. They didn't have a lot of leeway. Then, instead of a very arbitrary and vague sounding limit, you make clear your time limit and your time pressure. Further, I did mention that some of the problems they face seem self-inflicted, and there are 2 examples of this here that are most striking. When the booster fails to separate properly, the crew of the Prometheus say that they don't have time to prepare the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, or AMU, and instead spacewalk, but their oxygen cables don't reach far enough for them to get to the part they need to examine. None of that really makes much sense. The second is that disconnecting a spacesuit from its oxygen umbilical would lead to a total depressurization of the suit for some reason. I found that really strange because a simple one-way valve would be closed by the first movement of air out of the suit. NASA or the Russian Space Agency are building a billion-dollar spaceship, but they're too tight to pay for a valve that in the 70s probably wouldn't even cost $1. Surely these systems have double and triple fail-safes. I don't want to be too picky though, because mostly this section is very solid, but it is also interspersed with episodes set on Earth following the lives of ordinary folk of Cottenham Newtown. Most of this comes across as really rather quaint or cliched, with all the men out to work, but their poor downtrodden housewives fretting about what to cook them for their tea. It'd be quite dull, even without the contrast with those parts of the book that are genuinely gripping. When inevitable tragedy unfolds though, its impact is undeniable. The dart was never thrown, the game never finished, the holiday plans left unfulfilled. Irene would have to worry no more about her post office account. There would certainly be no Blackpool this year. There would be no life, no future, no existence for 20,931 men, women and children. Where this town and all its bustling life had been, there was now only a seared wasteland, a desert of death in England's green countryside, decently concealed for the moment beneath the shroud of dust and smoke that hid the horror below. But the impact comes in the final part. The anaphora, the alliteration, juxtaposition and the funereal shroud give this passage whatever poetic oomph it carries, because the humdrum characters are lifeless, their activities a mere distraction from the more interesting parts of the plot. The same is true at the end, when Patrick and co are stranded in space and counting down the minutes to their doom, but the novel focuses more and more on the political squabbling, the manoeuvring for power in the government and within NASA. We also get 3 scenes of a bumbling professor trying to find another professor in order to give them a piece of information that's concealed from the reader. It does actually work, in a way, but probably not in the way that was intended by the author, because these parts of the novel are so much less interesting than the fate of our astronauts that you do tend to speed read them and feel some of the astronauts' frustration. The back of the novel tells us that the nerve-wracking predicament of the crew of 6 shrinks to nothing beside the horrifying destruction which threatens hundreds of thousands of people, but again the problem here is that there's simply nobody to care about on the ground. There is truth in the adage too that the death of one is a tragedy, the death of millions is a statistic, and it's especially true when most of the people seen in this novel are likely safe, and we are told that this city might be destroyed, or this one, it's all rather vague, and not having a character in any of those places means that it's an abstract or nebulous threat, whereas to Harrison's credit, the 6 astronauts we do actually care about. Again, I'll compare this to another novel that I've reviewed recently, Peter Bryant's Red Alert, which was the basis for the movie Dr. Strangelove. Red Alert could almost be set as a play, its narrative setting and cast are so tight. We spend so much time with each member of that cast that we almost see the sense in the antagonist's madness. Here, there are so many people in so many places, and none of them in any kind of danger, that it just becomes a bit dull. The various factions in the politics, the subplot of the Americans trying to sneakily put a genuine death ray in space is just a nonsensical waste of time at this point in the novel. The fate of the Prometheus and its crew is all we care about, and the rest is a distraction and occasional irritant. In the latter case, I present as evidence the whole scene that takes place on a talk show with 3 irrelevant characters, one of which, Bert Shaker, might well be the worst comedian ever committed to paper or screen. If the middle act is a tense and effectively crafted piece of science fiction, the final act is bloated. The combination of Patrick and Nadia's relationship is as ridiculous as all the other phases, and so is the on and off again Cold War and the supposedly lethal solar flares that we're told about over and over again but simply don't amount to very much. Plus, all the predictions and worries about the spacecraft landing in a major urban centre are explained away by a news reporter. Because their efforts have kept this giant in the sky up there until now, until this moment when it's hurtling over the empty waste of the Pacific Ocean, if it falls now, no one below will be hurt. In truth, the crew failed to start their engine and therefore did precisely nothing to avert that disaster. Even what they did arrange to destroy the craft in space and prevent its uranium fuel from causing an atomic explosion on the ground was actually then rendered irrelevant if it was only going to land in the sea anyway. One heroic sacrifice rather undercut. Good job, book. In conclusion, Skyfall is the best of the 3 novels by Harrison that I've read. Some of the oddities that undermine its generally strong middle section are probably just particular to that era rather than something you'd truly describe as a weakness. The book's clear highlight, this section of the book comes closest to justifying the critical hype on the covers. The finale juggles too many threads that are hard to describe as interesting to truly be the breathtaking finale that the middle section probably warrants. But it does rather demonstrate that, despite the occasional eye-rollingly bizarre behaviour from our crew, that part of the novel, their ultimate fate, holds the interest even through the occasionally irritating distractions. I enjoyed this, but in recent times it's been surpassed in its own genre by films like Apollo 13 and Gravity, and in its own time I don't think it would have surpassed genre novels such as Red Alert and 2001. So, though while I give this one a recommendation, I do also advise you to check those other books out first. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.